Hello, and welcome to Why Make, where we talk with makers from different disciplines about what inspires them to make. I am your host, Eric Wolken. If you'd like to learn more about Why Make, please go to our website, why-make.com. Also, please consider supporting Why Make and our current fundraising campaign to support our trip to the Emma International Collaboration in Big River, Saskatchewan. Again, just go to why-make.com and click the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsor, Fractured Atlas.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Navigating the night together.
The music you are listening to is We Used to Be Birds by episode 61 guest Jonathan Byrd, actually the first musician to grace the Why Make podcast. This is a continuation of our conversation with Jonathan from episode 60. Jonathan is a musician, songwriter, storyteller, poet, photographer, painter, teacher, and now student in physics. So here we go with part 2 of a wide open discussion on a host of topics from songwriting to physics with Jonathan Byrd. Which actually brings me to my next point, which I also think is interesting, which is the issue of practice versus spontaneity. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question because how much practice do you need? And what's the mathematical equation of practice versus spontaneity? I have two far different equations because I practice a lot as a musician and my spontaneity is significantly less. But as a visual artist, it's almost all spontaneity because I don't think about the rules and the structure. I just think in a very spontaneous way. How do you think of that question?
I have written solos. So I've played a lot of gigs where it's just me. So the way that I construct a solo, the way that I play a solo has to support itself. The chord structure, the movement has to be somewhat obvious to the listener so that they don't get lost in the music as well. They have to be able to trust me that I'm taking them on the right road. And a lot of times I'm on stage, the monitors suck, some other chaos is happening, somebody's phone is going off in the third row, whatever. There's chaos at a performance. That's just what a show is. That's what a performance is. So I have these solos that are written out that I know in my body. Even if I can't hear myself, I can play this solo note for note. It will get over. People will enjoy it. It'll make them feel something. I know that. The better the environment is when I'm doing that performance, the more I can deviate from that solo. The more it's just a guideline. And then some nights, if everything feels great, I can hear myself. It feels like I can't play a wrong note. People gave me a standing ovation in the middle of a show just because they liked the song. Things are going so well, I might not think about that solo at all. I might just feel like I'm just going to try. I'm going to go up an octave higher. I'm going to go up the 14th fret on this acoustic guitar and just see what happens. And that's fun. That's great too. But I have this place where I can go if I need to. And I think the same is true when I'm writing. I know I can always write Tin Pan Alley style AABA song. I can always depend on that formula. I can find something to say in that structure. But when things are going really well, when I hit that zone, when I'm feeling more relaxed, when I'm not thinking about, got to do my taxes, whatever, I can play with that. And I can go farther. I can maybe put a chorus in this form that doesn't normally have a chorus, or maybe go to a second bridge that's a little different, or do this key change for the bridge, or push this form in some way, or maybe not even think about the form, depending on how I'm feeling that day. But I can go back to that form. I can go back to what I've practiced. I can always go back to that if I need to. And that's an important tool for me. That's kind of where I am with sort of studying chemistry and physics and engineering trades right now. I have to learn all the things that people already know. It's going to be years before I get to create. I have to spend a lot of time doing the things that people already know how to do. And I think the same is true as a maker in almost any regard. If you want to create something that is transcendent, you need to spend a lot of time doing things that people have already done.
Another thing that I think is a real element of your work is narrative. Mm-hmm. And I find narrative like one of our most powerful tools as makers. Mm-hmm. I think there was a huge transition for me when I went from making something that was essentially about being a table to making something that was a table that had a story. And then in the next step, a table that had a story about me. The step from creating a narrative and then involving yourself in that narrative just seems to make work that is really genuine.
I believe so. And in fact, I've got a couple of songs that are some of my most popular songs. They really affect people. And those people who are deeply affected will ask me what the song is about. They don't know. I know. I had a narrative. I had a reason for constructing it the way that I did. And I think there is some magic in that gets across. Whether or not they understand, on a conscious level what the song is about, I think you can feel that it's about something. Or a piece of sculpture or a piece of art. You can feel that it's about something if that intention is there in the artist. Narrative, the way that I come at narrative is really weird. I am generally a music first writer. That's my default mode.
Meaning melody first.
I think about music first, whether it's a beat or a riff on the guitar or a melody. I dream melodies sometimes.
Right.
I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, I got that. I figure that out really quick before I forget it. And then I start messing with words. I find words that kind of feel the way this melody feels. And a lot of songs that are story songs, songs of mine that are story songs that kind of are the songs that people are fascinated with because they really love the lyric, they love the story in it. They began as musical pieces. And the music defined what I could say in the song. The music gave me the parameters. And somehow I found the story through that. The story was important to me, but that's not where I started. And I think people have the impression that that's where I started. What gave you the idea for that song? I didn't have the idea and then start writing the song. I wrote a piece of music, and then I had to find an idea that worked.
That brings up a really interesting case because one of my favorite songs of yours, and I'll probably butcher the title, We Were Once Birds.
Oh, We Used to Be Birds.
We used to be birds. We used to be birds. I remember when I first heard you perform that at the Duke Gardens, and you told this wonderful story about, somebody approaching you, an ornithologist or something, saying, well, we didn't used to be birds, and you going, dude, it's a metaphor.
Yeah. No, she said, my husband is a paleontologist, and we were never birds.
Oh, we were never birds. Okay, I butchered the whole story. But I do remember it, because I remember you played it at Duke Gardens, and I heard it, and We Used to Be Birds, and it's an absolutely wonderful song, because it feels like you're flying. Mm-hmm. And I assumed the idea came to you first, and you're saying that it probably started as a melodica.
No, absolutely started as that guitar riff.
Yeah.
That guitar riff was just something fun. Like, I grew up listening to classic rock, and riffs were always kind of fascinating to me. That you could play something really that probably only works on this instrument in this tuning. because of the way it's constructed, that becomes the foundation of this song.
Is that what most people refer to as a hook?
Yeah, or, like Iron Man. Ba, 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 na, ba, ba, na, 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 ba, na, baka, baka, na. That's the song. And that song probably started as that guitar riff. It was like, oh, this sounds cool. What could this be about? And I've always loved that. And Zeppelin, and there's all these great bands that had these riffs that were like, they were the heaviness. They were the foundation of the song. And so We Used to Be Birds started with that, where I had this A chord that was all A's and E's. There was no third in it. It had this big open sound. And then there was a G chord, but the A was still there. And then there was a D chord, but the A was still there underneath it. And the A note keeps ringing through the whole song. There's this pedal tone, we call it, so this low A that just rings through the whole song that gives this kind of foreverness to the feeling of the song. So I had to find an idea that somehow used that feeling of changing but not changing. Like you say, like flying, or say you're standing at the ocean and the waves come in and out, and they just will do that forever. As long as you want to stand there, they will do it. And so that's where I landed. And I think, in retrospect, I wasn't thinking about this when I wrote the song, but in retrospect, my subconscious was saying to me, I used to call my girlfriend baby, and then she started calling me baby. And then when my son was born, he was young, really like 2 or 3 years old or something, and he would call us baby because he just thought like that's just what you call the people that you love or the people in your family or whatever, right? So we had this moment, and he kind of outgrew that, but we had this moment where we're all just like, it's like we're birds, like we're just chirping to each other, like I'm over here, this is my place, where are you? I'm over here. Hi, oh, are you over there? I'm over here. It's a very simple language that we boiled it down to say, I love you and I'm here. Oh, I love you too and I'm here. So We Used to Be Birds was this way of not saying that physically we are descended from birds or we used to be birds, but, emotionally we use the same language. And everything on the earth has access to this very simple language of survival and connection.
When I first thought about calling you up and having this conversation, I was thinking of that song because that song it really resonates with me. And my feeling from it was, we used to be birds, but we're evolving. Mm-hmm. Again, it's a metaphor. Mm-hmm. We did not used to be birds. Mm-hmm. We won't go into the biological reasons for that.
Yeah.
But of evolving. And I think when I first heard Jonathan perform that song, I knew he'd evolve into something else. There's something there. And then when I found out you were going back to school, that felt like the extension of We Used to Be Birds.
Interesting. Yeah.
So again, your intent and my intent, both equally valid.
Right, exactly. That's the beautiful thing about art.
Yeah.
Is that it gets you to tell your own story.
Right.
So I have another friend who thinks that song, he told me that song to him was, we used to be birds, as in we used to be in love in this way and we're not anymore. And to him it was a sad song about a relationship that used to be, that didn't exist anymore. I'm like, wow, of course, that's exactly what it's about.
Of course, it's whatever it wants. I mean, just like any piece of art or anything, it's your intentions are unimportant to anybody else. Mm-hmm. It brings up a lot of issues about who do we make art for? Do we make it for ourselves, or do we actually think about our audience? I don't think we're going to go there because I think it's too hard a question to answer, and I don't know whether the answer is important. Mm-hmm. Do you think the answer? Well, let's go there.
I'm not sure
the answer important.
I'm not sure if the answer is important, but to me, the most magical, special pieces that I've created are those pieces. So if you took We Used to Be Birds and you took the lyric apart and said, okay, I'm going to figure out what this means, you're not going to figure out what it means. It doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning.
It's an emotion
in it. And really, there's no inherent meaning in any words. They're just like flags. Like if you came from Mars and you saw the American flag, it would mean absolutely nothing to you. You would just try to figure out what it was made of, or you'd try to eat it, or whatever. I don't know. It would mean nothing to you. Without the culture and the history and the concepts and all your personal history with it, with the word means absolutely nothing. The Bible means absolutely nothing. The Declaration of Independence means absolutely nothing inherently. The meaning, the magic of meaning, is that it happens uniquely inside each person who encounters that word, that piece of art.
Right.
That is the real miracle of even a sacred text, is that it means something inside each person anew each time they encounter it.
Right.
To me, those are the most special magical pieces that I've created. There are songs I have that are story songs, or they're just a little more on the nose. This is what they mean. You can kind of point to their meaning more easily. I appreciate those songs too. The most magical ones to me are like "We Used to Be Birds" or "Coyote," or songs like that sort of just, they paint a picture that is a little out of focus maybe, and you have to figure out what it means for you.
Right. But the meaning for you is much more is emotional. I mean, because I know from personal experience, when people ask me what a piece of mine means, it's like I just make something up. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what in the moment caused that line to happen, other than that it was pleasing to me. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you what something means. So it's sort of interesting when people talk about art. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, a case where words are utterly meaningless, mm-hmm. because we're sort of creating this after effect. Mm-hmm. Well, we used to be birds. This meant this to me. But it's like, what did it mean in the moment? And that is a fleeting, ephemeral, non-existent thing. Mm-hmm. What it meant in the moment can't be recaptured, other than for you to take it in and what does it mean to you at this
mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
What
I'm learning now, right now, is so interesting to me. So I just wrote my first academic paper last semester. And in that form, I am trying to, as precisely as possible, relate these ideas. The meaning of the words is so important that part of the paper might be spent just defining the terms that I'm using before I can use them in this very precise way. But there was a moment in the making of this paper where it just felt so disconnected to me. Everything that I wanted was there. The facts were there. The references were there. The in-text citations were correct in MLA style. But it didn't feel connected to me. And I realized I had a personal story within this idea that I was trying to get across. That this idea mattered to me because it was part of my story, and that I hadn't told that part of the story. So I took kind of a large paragraph, and I told my personal history, my anecdote that had no quotations, no outside references. This is just the way I feel about it and what motivates me to think about this. And that one little piece made the whole thing work for me. The one piece that was actually much less precise than the rest of it was the part that made it human. If I'm human and I'm reading this, I am going to understand that the author is also human and that they have a story to tell. And it makes everything else mean so much more to me. Instead of just ideas, it's an expression.
Right. Again, another example of the power of narrative. Sort of switching topics into some of the other hats you wear, you're also a photographer. You're dabbling in painting. Poetry, sort of related to writing. But in photography and painting, how do you go about doing that? What's your entry point? When you see something you want to photograph, mm-hmm. does your visual art skills differ significantly from your musician-songwriter skills? Or are you basically taking the same skill set and just applying it to a different problem?
That's interesting. Photography is an interesting thing to bring into this conversation because you don't create every pixel in the photograph. You don't have the same kind of control. Depending on how you process it.
Right, you can.
Nowadays we have the tools to basically create a picture from scratch if you
Right.
want. But for me, when I'm trying to capture something that I see, you can't really take a picture of the thing. So I was just in Edinburgh.
As in Scotland.
In Scotland, yeah. And there was this beautiful clock that stuck out from a building over the street. It's a gorgeous clock. I walked by it 5 or 6 times. And every time I had a camera in my hands and I thought, God, I'd love to get a good picture of that clock. But the light wasn't right. And my favorite thing that I've learned about photography, the thing that has kept me from wasting time over and over again, is you're not taking pictures of things. You are taking pictures of light. If the light isn't right, there's nothing you can do to make it look interesting. I could have taken a picture of the clock, and it would be a snapshot. It would be a tourist photo. Oh yeah, I remember this cool clock that I saw in Edinburgh, and it would maybe lead me to some other cool memories that I had of that trip or whatever. But it wouldn't be a picture that I would frame or share on Instagram or impress anybody with. But if the sun had been at a certain angle, glinting off of the side and casting a cool shadow with the mounting hardware on the wall of the building, that would be a completely different picture.
Because that's a complete idea in many ways.
Yeah.
Because that's immediate. As soon as you said that, is that, yeah, there's 2 things here. There's 1, the clock, and 2, the presence of the clock. And the presence of the clock is all about light, and light is all about shadow.
Right, and what time of day or season it is, or
Right.
the concept of time, all those things. So for me as a photographer, that's just a practical thing that I keep in mind. You can't take a picture of a thing and have it be a great photograph. The lighting has to be right. The lighting has to be interesting. The light itself is a story in this photograph. Whether something is backlit or front lit or side lit, or somebody's walking into the light, or in cinematography a lot you see they shoot into the shadows. That means like somebody's facing the camera, most of their face will actually be in shadow. There'll be a little bit of light on the side, depending on the style of the film. But especially in sort of like detective movies or cowboy movies and like more dramatic stuff, you'll see them shooting into the shadows. And the contrast that creates and the story that it tells, like the light is on in the kitchen, but they're standing in the living room talking to you, and you can sort of place them in the space, and there's a sense of movement. All those things in photography and videography, to me, the light really tells the story.
Right.
So something like, so a photographer like Ansel Adams, right? He didn't have Photoshop, right? He didn't have whatever. He had to work in the darkroom. But they would do tons of things to photographs. They would crop them in certain ways, or they would what's called dodging and burning, which is like lightening certain areas and making other areas darker to bring your focus to a certain part. Like, this is the story that we want to tell. There are these mountains and there are these clouds, but what we really want you to see is the way this river moves through the landscape. And so we're just going to make that a little bit brighter, give it a little bit more contrast. And photographers have been doing that ever since photography was invented. They've been just moving things around a little bit to tell the story that they want to tell.
Hopefully what this conversation is bringing home to people is that this is all linked. And it's all linked to the original things we were talking about, which is sort of an awareness of the world around you and a curiosity. And these are foundational elements in making.
Right.
And whatever you want to make, and they're foundation. And again, to quote the great Tommy Simpson, whether you're planting sunflowers or you're making pies, these are all foundational elements. Right. Be curious, be open to those ink spots, or know when the shadow's just right and it feels right, and you're making something.
Yeah. There is something I want to say about photography to anybody who wants their picture taken. So the worst thing is somebody hires me as a photographer to take their portrait, and they have no idea what story they want to tell. They don't know how to dress. They don't know how to stand. They don't know what they're trying to say. Maybe they've written a book or they made an album or whatever, and they need some images to help promote this thing. But they have no connection to the story of the thing. And so I'm coming in as a photographer, and I have to invent the story myself, which may or may not be the story that they want to tell. And it's really awkward and it's really difficult, and you never really get a great result. When you ask a photographer to take your picture, or when you ask a songwriter to write a custom song for your wedding, when you ask an artist to do something, you're paying them, but you're also a collaborator. You got to bring something to them. You have to show up as well. You can't just give them the money and have them make a thing and expect it to be great. If you want it to be great, you have to show up as well. So I was just going back through this old photo shoot because I had the flu for about a week. I was just opening old photo shoots, and I like to review my own work, and I see sort of how far I've come, or how my work has changed, or I see something I didn't appreciate before in my own work. Wow, this is a great photograph. I didn't even realize that. And I was going back through this photo shoot with a lady named Nikki Morgan, who's from Western North Carolina. She's a great musician. And I said, I'd love to take pictures of you if you have a place up there that you want to go to. She said, hey, my grandpa's church. I think that'd be a great place. That would be meaningful to me to take pictures in my grandpa's church. I'm like, that's great. Okay, good start. I showed up. She had 3 different outfits. Each of the outfits represented a different character with their own backstory. There was like the church lady who was in the white dress and her white hat and her white shoes with her tambourine, and she was gung-ho. There was the penitent woman, who was this woman in a red dress, who she was laying on the floor, and like sometimes she said women would come to the front and they would sort of faint or fall down in the front, and somebody would rush out and cover their legs with a blanket, right? So they wouldn't be unseemly, right? So she had a red dress and she laid on the floor and she had this blanket, and she just went through all these emotions and she played the characters. And she was so good at doing all this stuff. I had to learn how to do new things in the moment, how to light her when she was moving around. And it was so rewarding. And going back through this photo shoot, she was a collaborator in the deepest sense. And that photo shoot is like, I would make an exhibit. I would put that in a gallery. There are probably a dozen pictures from that photo shoot that I would create a gallery exhibit out of as works of art. And it's not because I was so good at what I did. It's because she came with intent as a collaborator. So if you're going to work with an artist, even if you don't consider yourself to be an artist, as we have been saying, you are still creative. You have to be creative because you're human. Humans are creative. Bring that creativity to the project.
Right, and again, also hammering home the power of narrative, the
Yes.
power of a story to be an entry point into an idea.
Yes.
I hate to say that it makes the work relevant, because I don't think it's important whether the work is relevant or not, but there's a tangible emotional thing that translates that is more powerful than words and more powerful than the image itself.
It doesn't need to be relevant. I mean, it could just be relevant to you.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe your intention is for it to be relevant to other people. But a very simple set of questions to ask yourself if you're feeling a little lost about it. You're about to have your picture taken because you just made a record, or God help you if you did. But you need to promote something. You're an author. You just made a book and you need a picture taken for the jacket or whatever. Who are you? Is the first question. What do you want is the second question. And what stands in your way is the third question. Those 3 questions will take you a long way toward creating some kind of narrative to help you tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, and I think those are universal in any field of making. Whether you're making pies, or you're making sculptures, or you're writing songs, or you're taking photographs, or you're painting paintings. I mean, these are all tools to access your creativity and express your creativity. Now for something completely different. which is, I had to actually look up the nature of that phrase because we all use it. It's a Monty Python phrase.
Yep. And
they literally used to, and here's the definition. It's a classic phrase from Monty Python they used to transition from one weird thing to something even weirder. That is the Monty Python definition. And I don't necessarily think this is weirder, but let's talk about going back to school in physics. I grew up in the sciences. My father was a biophysicist. All of my brothers and sisters spent some time in my dad's lab. Every single one of us became an artist. Nobody went into the sciences.
Right.
To me, that's evidence already that there is a link between the sciences and the arts.
Absolutely.
And as we've talked about before, the other link is that science is process. People tend to think of science as a thing. Mm-hmm. You know, science is a guy in a white lab coat at a bench making science. No, science is a process. I actually looked up the scientific method. We all learned the scientific method in, what was it, 5th, 6th grade, something like that.
Right.
So the scientific method is basically question, research, hypothesis, experiment, data analysis, conclusion, and communication. Those are the 7 steps of the communication.
Here we are.
As we've just talked about already, you change some of those words, and you basically have the same process for making art.
Right. I think art is coming back into STEM because I think people realize that that communication is such an important part of science, and not just communicating with other scientists, but communicating to the press, communicating your idea to your investors, communicating to a team who works on something entirely different, who doesn't have the same understanding of the thing that you're working on that you do. Being able to communicate and to supply some kind of narrative to your ideas is really important. Like, it's just the way our brains work. Humans understand things in the terms of narrative. We have parables, we have fables, we have myths, we have fairy tales. Those things help us figure out how to be, what to do, what we value. And without the structure of story, without the structure of narrative, it's just a lot harder to remember those things or to embody those things. Even poetry, even the words that rhyme are a way to remember the thing. Like, there's a reason why we say big rig, right? Big rig. Or whatever. Like, I don't know, I can't think of it. In your daily life, just look out for words that have the same sounds that we use all the time. We do that because it helps us to remember the words and remember the idea behind the words. So that part of the art in STEM is important. I just recently made a friend with a neuroscientist and a researcher at UNC. And he writes his research papers with a fountain pen because there's no delete key. And he says, you can write about science and it's still an art if I write it with a fountain pen. And he gave me this idea that I think I've already said, is like, ideas are not enough. You have to have expression. You have to express the idea. And expression is emotional. Expression is not just these numbers.
Is communication what brought you to the sciences?
I think so, yeah. What I'm getting around to, I think, in my own process here is that I have always been fascinated with the sciences, physics in particular. But also part of that fascination was a fascination with great communicators. Like Carl Sagan, we remember who he was because he was such a fantastic communicator. He could relate the scientific idea to our human concerns.
Right, I remember in Memories Green, his autobiography that was 1,000 pages.
Yeah, the pale blue dot. So he had Voyager turn around and take a picture of the Earth through the rings of Saturn from, however many millions of miles away. That was a narrative decision. But that made the science important to us in a completely different way than just understanding how planets work. Like understanding how we work.
Right.
Understanding what's important to us to continue.
And of course realizing that understanding is just a fleeting moment.
Mm-hmm.
because it's what we understand in the moment. In the next moment, we may understand something completely different. And that's, fundamentally what I think people get wrong about the sciences, is that our understanding is only good in the moment.
Right.
And that our understanding continually changes. It's a spectrum.
Right.
And it is, again, so close to the arts.
Right.
I mean, your understanding of the color blue when you first start painting is so different than your understanding of the color blue and the many different hues and shades of blue, 10 years down the road.
Right. No, I thought I knew what color was until I started taking pictures. And I'm just continually learning all the time.
Right.
The color is not at all what I thought it was. Like, this thing that looks blue is actually just a slightly bluer shade of red than the red thing that's next to it.
Right, exactly.
But the contrast is enough that my brain tells me that it's blue. And that perception, I think that's the most difficult thing about science, though. But the most important thing about science is that to continually confront your own bias.
Exactly.
You have to. If you don't, there's like no progress to be made unless you can say, what if I'm wrong? What does that mean if I'm wrong? And that idea in the sciences is called falsifiability. How could I prove myself wrong? And if I try to prove myself wrong, am I successful? If I can't prove myself wrong with this theory, then it's a pretty good theory. I think I can get it
right, because you've actually looked at it in 360. You've looked at it all the way around.
Yeah.
Is how science work all that different from how anything works? It's all process. I mean, we're not talking medicine, or we're not talking auto mechanics. Part A fits into part B, or engineering. But I think in a philosophical sense, not only science and the art totally a part of the same thing, but I'm not so sure the rest of what we do isn't all process. And that process needs to maintain an openness to change because ideas change, because realities change. I mean, we talk about anything. I mean, as we've talked about here, being a touring musician is not something that works anymore. The realities have changed.
Right.
If you were a Polaroid photographer 25 years ago and your whole specialty was this magical thing called the Polaroid camera, well, it doesn't exist anymore. Right. If you were used to shooting on film, largely doesn't exist anymore. The realities change.
Right.
And I'm not so sure whether this is a statement to being open or this is a statement to being flexible, but I think it's all sort of part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah, I think being a student and I think being a maker is to be a maker is to continually be a student. And being a student is making the process conscious. So I think when, let's say, like religious zealots interpret the sacred text, they are not conscious of that process of interpreting the meaning for themselves inside themselves. They believe that the words have an inherent meaning that they don't. Now, being a student and being a scientist and being a maker, I think, makes that process conscious to say, what is actually happening here? And how can I harness this? How can I learn from this process of, I can take the meaning of this text, I can go back 2,000 years and study paleontology, archaeology, and say, okay, how were people living? What was their government like? What kind of food did they eat? What was their societal structure like? Now go back to the text and read it and say, okay, so what did this mean to them in the context of all those things? And then, move forward 1,000 years later when people were still reading this. Okay, what were their lives like? How were they interpreting this? And then how did that ripple out into the world? How did they affect the world believing in a certain meaning of this text? And so now you can do what we talked about at the very beginning of this whole thing, where you bring the stranger in and you say, okay, now tell me what I should do here. get outside of my own head and say, what are my biases? How am I interpreting this?
Right.
What's the meaning and what am I bringing to this text?
Well, I mean, I think that's a wonderful place to sort of wrap it up here. Hopefully, we've said some enlightening things about the process of making and the process of creativity. But wow, thanks, Jonathan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. It's been fun.
And as we always say at the end of the podcast, why make? This is the conclusion of our discussion with Jonathan Byrd, a very eloquent and intelligent mind, and I wish him the best of luck. As always, thank you so much for listening to Why Make. Why Make is a production of Rob Helmkamp and Eric Wolkin, and you can support our current fundraising campaign for our trip to the Emma International Collaboration in Big River, Saskatchewan by going to why-make.com and clicking on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsored Fractured Atlas.